Welcome to M Night Shyamalan week here on the channel. I am happy to announce that there's more than one video coming this week that involves M Night Shyamalan. So stay tuned later in the week to find out what the next video is. But today we are going to be reviewing Knock at the Cabin, which, as many of you know, is my most anticipated movie of 2023. And I know that seems kind of random, but M Night Shyamalan is genuinely... I guess my house is haunted because my TV just started playing all by itself. As I was saying, M Night Shyamalan is genuinely one of my favorite thriller creators. I want to say horror, but he doesn't really make true horror movies, I would say. They're more thrillery, but he's still one of my favorite creators, and although he's very hit or miss for many people, and even for me, I actually hate some of his movies. If you want to find out which ones, stay tuned this week. Anyway, because Knock at the Cabin was my most anticipated movie of the entire year, I knew I wanted to make an effort to see it in theaters, even though I just had a baby. So my daughter is almost 2 months old now, and I did manage to go and see this in theaters. I went by myself and just had my partner look after her for a little bit, and I was so excited to go back to the movie theater. It had been so long. I think the last one I saw was Violent Night before I had my baby, so not a great one to end on, but still. Anyway, I was just happy to be back in the theater. While vacationing at a remote cabin in the woods, a young girl and her parents are taken hostage by four armed strangers who demand they make an unthinkable choice to avert the apocalypse. Confused, scared, and with limited access to the outside world, the family must decide what they believe before all is lost. Now, this is of course adapted from the Paul Tremblay book, The Cabin at the End of the World, which I love that book. I read it before I knew it was going to be adapted into a movie, and then of course when I heard it was M Night Shyamalan doing it, I got even more excited. Paul Tremblay is one of my favorite, if not my favorite author of all time. He's an automatic buy for me, and I read everything that he comes out with. He's just an incredible writer, and I love him and his stories, and it was so exciting to see his name on the big screen. I got a little giddy all by myself in the theater, like, oh, that's Paul Tremblay. So Knock at the Cabin is actually M Night Shyamalan's second movie ever to get an R rating. He usually does PG-13 thrillers, so that's another thing that I was excited about, that this was given an R rating. The only other movie that he's done that has that is The Happening. Not sure if it needed an R rating. I feel like his R ratings are very mild compared to other R-rated movies, so don't get your hopes up too much that this is rated R, because it's still done in, you know, M Night Shyamalan fashion. So Knock at the Cabin is going to be a very difficult movie to review, because anything I say I feel like is just going to be a spoiler, because there's so many expectations. One, when you go into an M Night Shyamalan movie, right? And two, with the story and everything, I just don't want to give anything away. So most of this review will be in the spoiler section. I will warn you, of course, they begin at this point, but I'll give a couple thoughts before we actually delve into the full review, because I just don't know if I can review this without talking in detail, especially because I want to do a little bit of a book to movie comparison. Now, I will say right off the bat, this wasn't as much of a hit for me as I wanted it to be, as I had hoped for. And maybe that's my issue, my fault, that I had really high expectations for this, because I loved the book. I love M Night Shyamalan, and Rupert Grint was in it, and I was so excited to see him. So I feel like I had so many hopes going in that maybe that's what led to it not being as good as I wanted it to be. So I'm gonna say it, the book was better. It's just a fact, you know, or at least that's a fact in my opinion. Again, I'll get into specifics in the spoiler section, but there are a few major changes between the movie and the book that I wasn't a huge fan of. I prefer what happens in the book compared to the movie. The movie still had a lot of tension, but I do feel like it's almost not ruined. The movie experience isn't ruined by me reading the book first, but I think those who hadn't read the book would probably find this movie a little bit more suspenseful and maybe better and more enjoyable than if you had read the book before going into the movie, because I think that you're just setting yourself up a little bit for disappointment. So maybe I would recommend, this is rare that I do this, watch the movie first and then read the book if you are debating reading the book at all. Normally I say read the book first, so that is your first impression of things, but I think you'd genuinely enjoy the movie a little bit more if you didn't read the book, and then you read the book and then you're like, wow, the book is so much better, but it doesn't ruin or take away from your movie experience. Now, M. Night wasn't the only one to blame as far as changing some things about the book. He had two other writers on the movie with him, Steve Desmond and Michael Sherman. It was mostly M. Night's decisions to change the things that they did, but this is the first time in, I think, 10 years since he has shared writing credit. The last movie he did that was After Earth, written by Will Smith, which I will talk about later this week. And the writers of this movie claim, and M. Night claims, that they had to change the story for this movie. And I have a little bit of an issue with that. Again, I'll talk specifically about it and why in spoilers. But I just feel like they were catering to wider audiences, and I understand the decision, but as a lover of the book, I was disappointed. So the R rating, let's talk about that, because when I first heard that this was R rated, I got excited because that could only mean one thing: gore. There's gore in the book. I was expecting a lot more in the movie, but M. Night kind of, he never pushes the limit. He's always very, very tame. I think this was really close to being passable for a PG-13 rating, to be honest. It's rated R for language and violence, but the violence is very tame. There isn't really a lot that you see on camera. There are darker themes to it, so like the concept of what's going on and stuff like that is a little bit darker than what he normally does. But I still wanted a little bit more. If we're gonna have an R rating, let's see some gore on screen, So let's get into spoilers, shall we? I know that was very brief. I think I give this like a 3 out of 5 overall. I recommend it for the theater, especially if you've read the book. You might as well go see it in the theater, right? But it's not his best movie by any means, and it's not my favorite. Probably will not be my favorite movie of the year. I still had a lot of fun with it. I was very, very excited to just be back in the theater, to be honest, and like just the whole experience itself. That probably added a lot to it for me because it's been so long since I've seen a movie. That's just speaking on my own experience. Anyway, let's get into spoilers and let's break down this movie and talk about it and do a little book to movie comparison. So one of the things that's very different, I think, from the book is how vague the story is in the book, but not in the movie. I feel like M. Night could have kept this much more vague, because if you take everyone for their word, they're literally telling you everything in the movie. Like everything that's going to happen, they're telling you right up front. And yes, you're sitting there questioning whether or not to believe them, but at the same time, it took away the tension, I think, because it wasn't as vague as I wanted it to be. They do a couple back and forth, like, are they telling the truth? Are they not? Like, you don't really know. You're sitting there doubting them a lot of the time. But I feel like it could have been even more doubt put in the viewer's mind, especially when it comes to the end. Like, the end in the book is so vague and you're kind of left for interpretation. And I loved that, because you don't need everything spelled out for you, and the viewer or the reader can kind of interpret it however they please. But in the movie, it's very straightforward. It's very straightforward ending, although they claim it's not. And by they, I mean like the movie creators and M. Night. They say it's still vague. I don't think it is, especially compared to the book, but that's just me. And I found that the story's a little bit over-explained. It's a little repetitive as they go along. I really enjoyed, however, the apocalyptic imagery. The planes falling out of the sky were incredible. I loved that imagery. The wave, the giant tsunami, that was cool. So I really enjoyed the visuals of this movie. I feel like M. Night is very strong in that. But the story itself is like over-explained and a little bit spoon-fed to the viewer. We like revisit things constantly and it's just not as strong. So I think the argument is that Andrew and Wen, who are the survivors of the whole movie, don't actually know if Eric, his husband, died in vain, or if the events would have actually stopped on their own without Eric dying. It just seemed a little too straightforward. You can argue that maybe it would have stopped and we don't know, but it was just too obvious. Like, it was too convenient that Eric dies and then everything kind of stops. So to me, that feels very straightforward. And in my opinion, it was very heavy-handed of M. Night explaining, how the apocalypse ended, kind of thing. To me, it was very obvious. At least that's how I interpreted it personally. Maybe some people could still see the vagueness and like the viewer can still interpret it like, did Eric need to die? I don't know. So let's talk about the major changes besides that, besides the overall like feeling of the movie. The book is so sad. I cried so much when I read the book, and they took away all of that intensity for the movie. So in the book, I'm going to spoil the book. Should I spoil the book? I'm going to spoil the book because this is a book to movie comparison. But read the book. In the book, when the daughter actually dies and her sacrifice isn't counted as a willing sacrifice because she dies by accident of a gun firing while they're in like a tussle. This is obviously heartbreaking, especially when you know the entire story and like what they're meant to do. And the fact that she just dies for no reason in the book, I find just, it's, you know, heartbreaking, but it adds so much to the story, I think, and it adds higher stakes to the whole situation. And there was the tussle in the movie with the gun, and I was like bracing myself because I thought Wen was about to be shot, and then she wasn't, and then she lives. So I take issue with this. I know some people are gonna be like, why would you want a kid to die? It just adds a lot to the story. I think it's better in the book when that happens because you're realizing how serious everything is, you know, that's going on. And the movie is just a little bit lighter. It's a little lighter in tone. Obviously there's heaviness to it. People are dying and being killed, but off screen. So it doesn't have the same intensity as the book did. And they could have recreated that without having to kill Wen. They could have put in more scenes, like gruesome scenes and, you know, the actual deaths and things. We don't even get to see Eric die. I just feel like there was a lot missing from that, and it didn't have the same like feeling as the book did. Also, the way in which the people die, I call them the four horsemen, the way the four horsemen, you know, die sequentially in the movie is different from the book. So Leonard in the movie takes his own life. In the book, he is killed. And also the women that are killed are like flipped in the movie. So there are just some different changes. I'm not sure why they did it that way. I think, again, it would have been a lot more tense. There was still a struggle and a battle, but there wasn't like a heaviness in the scene when Leonard kills himself. I'm sorry. Because in the book, one of the other members actually kills Leonard because she's no longer interested in carrying out the mission. This is after Wen dies, and so she's like, no, this is too much. Like, it doesn't matter anymore. We need to stop this, and kills Leonard. So I would have preferred that because, again, that adds like layers to it, you know? It adds a little bit more complexity. Everything in the movie was a little bit more simple and straightforward. So in the book, neither Eric nor Andrew die. So in the movie, Andrew kills Eric, although Eric, you know, convinces him to do that. He's a sacrifice and the apocalypse ends. But in the book, there's this vague sense of like, I don't know what's going to happen. Eric and Andrew drive off and they don't know if the apocalypse, if any of it was real. You never find out if, in fact, it's going to happen and the world's about to end. And Eric and Andrew are just going to live it out together. So I like that they never give a confirmation of what is happening, because still, you see the things on the news and those things are playing out, but you still don't know if it's related at all. Like, you don't know if these people are just making it up or they're losing their minds. I like the more ambiguous ending in the book than what we got in the movie. I just wish that M. Night stuck a little bit more closer to the source material because it's so strong and there's so much potential there, and had the guts to kill Wen. I know that sounds horrible, but I feel like it would have added so much to the movie. If not, then added more gore and more violence. But that's not really M. Night's thing, you know? He's very tame. Like I said, he makes thrillers. It's very, very tame usually, and in good taste. Like, he's very tasteful with his violence typically. But this is one of those times where you get an R rating and you want more. And also, there's no twist in this movie. I know people are saying that that's a twist in and of itself because M. Night usually has a twist in his movies. So I'm left questioning if M. Night was actually the best person to tackle this story. I would have almost rather preferred someone else do it if this is what we were gonna get. And I know that sounds harsh. I still enjoyed the movie, but I wanted, you know, like I said, more. Again, M. Night wasn't the only writers on the movie, but they do say that we adapted it slightly different than the book, and then Shyamalan had a whole new vision for what the ending could be. So it really was M. Night's vision to change the ending. The book is the book and the movie is the movie, and we think both were exceptional mediums. This is a big, wide release movie that is meant for a very large audience. There are some decisions that the book made that were pretty dark and may have been a little too much for a broader audience. That was a decision that Shyamalan immediately recognized. It's a great ending now. I don't love how they say it's a great ending now. Like, now that we rewrote it, now it's good. I mean, it's happy. You got a happier, I mean, still Eric dies, it's sad, but it's better, probably less sad than Wen dying. So I understand that that is a darker story, but I don't love that change. I don't know. I understand they're trying to appeal to a wider audience, but I'm kind of tired of movies doing that, either with their rating, they're trying to get PG-13 ratings, aka Megan, or they're trying to rewrite a story because it's too dark and wider audiences won't get it or love it. I don't love the catering to the audience as much like that. So Paul Tremblay actually did have a comment on the hopeful ending and says that it's actually not that hopeful. I find it horrific. There's this higher power that is going to willy-nilly sacrifice humans for everybody else, he said. It doesn't seem like a very moral thing to do, so I don't find it that hopeful. I find the idea of what happened in my book, that the two characters reject that, like, no, we're not going to sacrifice, that's wrong, we're going to go on. That's a little bit more hopeful. So I find that really interesting that Tremblay finds his book ending more hopeful than the movie, because the movie is like, no, the apocalypse is gonna happen. Like, it's gonna happen, and then they have to make a sacrifice, and they do, versus the book, they choose not to. And then M. Night's take on this movie is very interesting to me. He says, the most important thing at the end is that everybody puts themselves in the character's shoes. What would they have done? I feel that genre helps me tell emotional stories. I'm generally an optimistic guy, so I get to do really dark things, and the audience feels held by somebody that isn't nihilistic. I can push pretty hard because you can feel the vocabulary is not from someone who's trying to hurt you. And this is a very interesting interpretation, I think, of M. Night Shyamalan style movies. Because he's not wrong. He is not nihilistic. He's not going to just kill people for the sake of killing them and push those darker themes. But then when he does, it's like in a thriller setting, so it's not overwhelming or too much. So overall, I did enjoy this movie. I enjoyed the movie experience. Granted, part of it was that I had not been in a theater for a long time, but also I really enjoy M. Night Shyamalan's storytelling regardless of the movie. And I like his style of filmmaking. So I loved the camera work. The camera work in the beginning of this movie specifically was so impactful to me and so eerie and creepy. I was expecting a lot more, and I prefer other movies from M. Night over this one. To find out which those are, stay tuned. But yeah, what were your thoughts on Knock at the Cabin? Have you read Paul Tremblay's book? And generally, what are your overall thoughts on M. Night Shyamalan? I know he's a controversial director and extremely hit or miss for everyone. Literally everyone has a hit or miss movie from M. Night Shyamalan. So I would love to hear your thoughts down below. I hope you enjoyed, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.